Hi, I'm Sabrina. I spent years helping build my family's business until I stepped away from maternity leave. When I came back, my role? Quietly handed to my sister. No warning, no conversation. But worse than losing my seat was realizing they never planned to give it back. They expected me to accept it, fade away. Instead, I started asking questions. Questions that led me here. Want to know what I found? You never think you'll come back from maternity leave and have to introduce yourself again to your own family. 8 years. 8 years of missed weekends, skipped vacations, holiday dinners spent drafting pitches, and troubleshooting supply chain issues. My parents didn't always say it, but I knew they counted on me. I was the one keeping the wheels turning in the family business. Lydia, my younger sister, floated in and out, helping with events, social media posts now and then. But the day-to-day, that was mine. I believed family meant something deeper than contracts. It meant trust, loyalty, an unspoken bond that when I stepped away to care for my child, they would hold my place. That belief was what made the betrayal cut so deep. The first crack came softly. I was nursing Ethan when an invoice popped up on my phone. A routine supplier payment, but it was flagged as pending approval. I frowned. That wasn't right. I approved vendor payments. I logged in, expecting the usual dashboard, but my account bounced back with an error. Access revoked. A fluke, I thought. Maybe it was restructuring roles for my leave. But as the hours turned into days, something in my chest tightened, a tension I couldn't quite shake. Brian from IT called back after a day and a half. Hey, Sabrina, listen, about your account access, it's been reassigned. Evelyn, your mom, asked me to consolidate logins while you were out. Reassigned? Consolidated? I was the operations manager. There wasn't a single client or vendor I didn't have a direct hand in managing. Brian, I said, struggling to keep my tone steady, who's handling approvals now? A pause. You should probably talk to Evelyn. I gave it another day, told myself I was overreacting, that everything would smooth out when I returned officially. But then the second crack appeared. A photo on Facebook. Lydia, standing next to the mayor at a ribbon cutting for a new store location. She was holding the scissors. The caption beneath read, "Celebrating another milestone with Lydia Coleman, acting CEO of Coleman Interiors." My hands went cold. Lydia had never been interested in leadership. She was the charming one, the social butterfly, not the backbone of this company. And CEO? That title had never been discussed, let alone handed out. I showed up at the office the next morning without an appointment, without a call. I walked through the glass doors I'd helped choose during the last renovation, the lobby I'd overseen when we expanded 3 years ago. But something felt off. The receptionist, Amanda, gave me a strained smile, the kind you offer someone at a wake. Colleagues passed by, nodding politely, but no one stopped to chat. I wasn't one of them anymore. When I reached my mother's office, Evelyn stood to greet me, that practiced warmth in her voice. "Sabrina, look at you, glowing. How's Ethan?" I forced a smile. "Growing fast," she gestured for me to sit. I didn't. "I saw the post," I said. "Lydia, acting CEO?" Evelyn's smile didn't waver. "Oh, sweetheart, she's just helping out. You've had so much on your plate. We needed someone to keep the ship steady." I blinked. "Mom, I'm operations. I've been operations. You couldn't even keep the inventory system running without me." Her tone softened, like I was the one being unreasonable. "Exactly why you needed this break. Lydia's stepping in temporarily, giving you time to bond with Ethan. It's important." I never said I was stepping down. I crossed my arms. "I plan to come back." "And you are," she said, hands folded neatly on the desk. "But maybe not in the same capacity. Things have shifted, Sabrina. Clients are responding well to Lydia's energy. She's bringing a fresh perspective." My throat tightened. "What does that even mean?" Evelyn's voice dropped, gentle but firm. "You're a mother now. Priorities change. Maybe it's time to think about what balance looks like for you." Balance. That word, thrown like a lifeline, felt more like a noose. I left without another word, the walls of the office pressing in as I passed familiar faces that no longer felt familiar. I sat in my car for a long time, staring at the steering wheel, my chest hollow. I had built this. I had stayed late, fixed mistakes, soothed irate clients, expanded our supply chain. I had made the business profitable again. Lydia smiled for the cameras. I made sure the lights stayed on, and now I was replaced. But that was only the first blow. The second came a week later during a family dinner. Lydia, bright and animated, recounted the ribbon cutting as if I hadn't seen the pictures. My father chimed in about new client partnerships, how Lydia's really stepping up. I sat quietly, pushing food around my plate, until my mother turned to me. Sabrina, you should be proud. You've laid such a strong foundation for her to build on. I swallowed the bitterness, nodding tightly. That night, as I tucked Ethan into bed, I realized something. They weren't waiting for me to come back. They'd already moved on. Ever felt the ground shift beneath you while everyone else kept smiling? You know what's worse than being replaced? Sitting at the table while they pretend you're still there? I tried to believe that dinner would feel normal, that family could be separate from business. But as the plates passed and Lydia's voice filled the space between us, it was clear. I wasn't at that table as their daughter anymore. I was a placeholder, a guest in my own story. And then I told the design team, Lydia said, laughing as she waved her wine glass. The color scheme needed a refresh. You can't stay stuck in neutral tones forever. Evelyn smiled, leaning in as if Lydia had said something profound. I always knew you had an eye for this, sweetheart. I set down my fork, trying to keep my expression steady. Lydia had never cared about color schemes. That had been my project, the branding refresh 2 years ago, that turned our struggling interior firm into the go-to name for modern redesigns. She hadn't even shown up for the pitch. So, how's the client reception been? I asked lightly, careful not to sound bitter. Lydia turned toward me, her smile soft but sharp. Actually really great. They've responded well to the new vibe. I think they were ready for something fresh. Evelyn chimed in. It's been seamless. Lydia's really found her stride. Seamless. Like I had never been there. Later that night, after I tucked Ethan in, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the blank wall. I'd stopped counting the late nights I'd spent crafting proposals, fixing supplier mistakes, smoothing over client concerns. All invisible now, erased behind Lydia's curated smiles. I opened my laptop. Maybe I was overthinking. Maybe they hadn't meant to push me aside. I typed in the client dashboard login, the one I used for years. Access denied. My chest tightened. I reached for my phone and called Miriam, the client I'd worked with the longest, the one I thought would always be there. Hey Miriam, just checking in. How's the remodel going? I asked, forcing my voice light. There was a pause on the other end, just enough to tell me she wasn't expecting my call. Oh, Sabrina, hi. It's going well. Lydia's been really on top of things, she said, her tone polite but distant. We've mostly been working through her. I swallowed. Of course, just wanted to touch base. But I could hear it. The unspoken question, why are you calling? Aren't you out? The next morning, I walked into the office again, this time determined not to be sidelined. I stepped into the Monday operations meeting, the one I'd run for years. Heads turned. Lydia sat at the head of the table, confidently flipping through slides about expanding our design packages. Sabrina, I didn't know you'd be joining, she said, that gracious tone that sounded too rehearsed. I smiled, setting my notebook down. I thought I'd sit in, catch up. Lydia exchanged a look with Evelyn, but neither objected. The presentation moved on, but the numbers didn't lie. Lydia's new marketing strategy had cost us 2 major clients in the last month, clients I had nurtured. I raised a hand. Can we talk about the loss of the Fowler and Carmichael accounts? That's over 20% of our projected revenue. Lydia smiled, tight. We're repositioning, focusing on upscale clientele who align with our new vision. Our new vision? I echoed, my voice sharper than I intended. Evelyn cleared her throat. Let's take this offline, shall we? Offline. Away from the table. Out of sight. In the hallway afterward, I caught up with Lydia. Repositioning? I asked, folding my arms. You lost 2 of our longest-standing clients. She didn't miss a beat. They weren't the right fit anymore. I'm modernizing, Sabrina. By erasing what built this company? Lydia's smile turned brittle. You took a break. Things changed. You knew that would happen. I stared at her, the words too heavy to swallow. I never stepped down, I whispered. Lydia's gaze didn't waver. But you weren't here. Back in my car, the weight of that statement pressed against my chest. I wasn't here. I had believed stepping back for Ethan wouldn't cost me the life I built. That family understood, that they would hold my place. But I realized something that night sitting in the dark parking lot, staring at the office lights fading behind me. They hadn't saved my seat. They had cleared it. Ever felt the silence in a room speak louder than anyone at the table? There's a certain kind of silence that wraps around you when the people closest to you decide they've moved on. It's not loud, not angry. It's cold, calculated, a door closing so softly that you barely realize you've been shut out until you reach for the handle and find it locked. I sat at my kitchen table that night, Ethan sleeping soundly in the next room, the soft hum of the baby monitor the only sound breaking the stillness. My laptop sat open in front of me, the Coleman Interiors website staring back at me with Lydia's smiling face now front and center. Our vision, modern, fresh, forward-thinking, words that felt like a slap. My projects, my designs, all scrubbed clean of my name. I scrolled through the client roster. A few familiar names, some I had brought in myself, but they were now listed under Lydia's portfolio. I paused on Miriam's name, the longest-standing client I had. She hadn't returned my last call. I closed the laptop, my hands trembling slightly. How had I let it get this far? The next morning, I decided to stop waiting. I walked into the office again, unannounced. If they wanted to pretend I was invisible, I'd remind them I wasn't. I headed straight to the design room, where samples and mood boards lined the walls. Lydia stood there with two junior designers, discussing color palettes for an upcoming project. She turned, surprised to see me. "Sabrina, we weren't expecting you today." "I noticed," I replied coolly. "Thought I'd check in on the Sinclair project." Lydia's smile tightened. "Oh, we've shifted direction there. The client wanted something edgier." "I spoke with Sinclair before my leave," I said, stepping closer. "They wanted classic, not edgy." "Well, people change their minds," Lydia shrugged, turning back to the fabric swatches. "And so do clients." I held her gaze, feeling that familiar twist in my gut. This wasn't just about creative differences. This was erasure. Later, I bumped into my father in the hallway. Mark Coleman, the quiet backbone of the family, always more at home with numbers than people. He smiled when he saw me, but there was something guarded behind it. "Hey, kiddo," he said, adjusting his glasses. "Good to see you around." "Is it?" I asked, leaning against the wall. He gave me that fatherly chuckle, the one that used to reassure me as a child. "Of course." "Then why does it feel like no one's expecting me to come back?" His smile faltered, just slightly. "You've got a lot going on. The baby, home life. It's understandable if you need more time." I crossed my arms. "I never said I needed more time. I said I was coming back." He nodded, but it felt like he wasn't really listening. "Things move fast around here. Lydia's been stepping up." "Is that what this is? Stepping up?" I pressed. "Or is it stepping over?" His eyes hardened for just a second. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be, Sabrina." I stood frozen as he walked away. The man who used to check my homework, who taught me how to ride a bike, couldn't even meet my eyes when I asked him for the truth. That night, after Ethan fell asleep, I sat down with my planner, something I hadn't touched since before my leave. Every page from the past year was filled with meetings, projects, deadlines, proof of my work, my worth, and yet they acted like I was an afterthought. I flipped to a blank page. If they could move on without me, then maybe I could move on from them. I scribbled out a list: contacts, former clients, vendors, people who knew my work, people who respected what I had built. One name stood out: Janet, a former client who had once told me, "If you ever go solo, call me." My hand hovered over my phone, hesitant for just a second. Then I called. "Sabrina," Janet answered, warm as ever. "To what do I owe this surprise?" I smiled, for the first time in days. "I've been thinking about branching out, starting something small on my own. Would you be interested?" There was a pause, then a soft laugh. "I've been waiting for this call." For the first time since stepping back from the family business, I felt the ground beneath me steady. Maybe I didn't need their table. Maybe I could build my own. Ever felt like starting over wasn't a setback, but the first real step forward? There's a quiet defiance in moving forward when no one expects you to. When the door closes, and instead of knocking, you find another way out. For weeks, I operated in the background, reintroducing myself to the people who knew my work, not as the daughter of Evelyn and Mark Coleman, but as Sabrina, the one who had shown up for them when no one else did. I called it my side project at first, but deep down, I knew it was more than that. It was a lifeline. Janet signed on immediately, asking me to consult on a new boutique hotel redesign she was leading. It wasn't the biggest project, but it was mine. I worked late into the nights after Ethan went down, sliding mood boards across my kitchen table, layouts stacked beside bottles and pacifiers. It felt good, quietly reclaiming a piece of myself. But it wasn't just about getting clients back. It was about reminding myself that I was still capable, that I had never needed their permission to begin. One morning, as I reviewed Janet's color palette suggestions, my phone buzzed. The caller ID made me pause. Miriam, the client I thought I'd lost completely. "Sabrina," she greeted, hesitance laced in her tone. "I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." I straightened, surprised but masking it. "Not at all. How are things?" There was a beat of silence, the kind that lets you know something's shifted. "I wanted to ask you something. Off the record." I leaned in, sensing the weight behind her words. "Go ahead." "It's about the Sinclair project. I heard you were originally heading it, but Lydia's taken over?" My jaw tightened. "That's right." Miriam sighed. "They're not happy. They feel pushed into a direction they never asked for. Edgy and modern isn't their style." I rubbed my forehead. "I thought as much." "I know it's complicated with your family," Miriam said cautiously, "but if I were to, say, recommend someone else to take over, would you be interested?" The question hung between us, heavier than it should have been. I smiled, soft but sure. "Absolutely." By the following week, I was meeting with the Sinclairs at a cafe downtown, away from the polished surfaces and glossy pitches Lydia had thrown at them. They wanted warmth, stability, not flash. And I delivered. They signed on with me privately. That's when I realized I wasn't just taking back clients. I was becoming the alternative they never knew they needed. It didn't take long for the ripple effect to reach Coleman Interiors. I heard about the blow-up from an unlikely source, Brian from IT. A quiet call, one that started with an apology. "Sabrina, I know I'm not supposed to say this, but things are messy over here. Your sister's scrambling. The Sinclairs left, and now the Carmichael account is on the fence too." I leaned back in my chair, my heart pounding in that strange mix of guilt and vindication. "They know?" I asked. Brian hesitated. "Not for sure, but Lydia's blaming the market, the clients, everything but the decisions she's making." I bit my lip, fighting the urge to laugh. I hadn't laid a finger on their empire. I'd simply stepped away and done the work I knew how to do. A week later, an email arrived. Not from Lydia, but from my mother. Subject: coffee? No body text, just a time and place. I almost didn't go. But something inside me, a tether I hadn't yet cut, pulled me there. We met at a quiet coffee shop, the kind my mother used for negotiations when she didn't want things overheard. Evelyn greeted me with her usual polished smile, but there was something beneath it now, an edge, a calculation. "Sabrina," she began, stirring her tea slowly. "I've heard about the Sinclairs." I met her gaze, calm. "I'm sure you have." She set her spoon down, fingers clasped neatly. "I wish you'd come to us. We could have worked something out." I leaned in, soft but deliberate. "I did come to you, Mom. I came back ready to work. You handed my position to Lydia." Evelyn's smile didn't falter, but her eyes darkened. "We were trying to give you space." "Space to disappear?" I asked. She exhaled slowly. "We're family, Sabrina. This back and forth, it's not helping anyone." I held her gaze. "I'm not the one who started this." The silence between us thickened. Finally, she reached into her bag and slid an envelope across the table. "Just think about it," she said. Inside was an offer to buy out my shares quietly, keep the peace, step away cleanly. I stared at it, the finality of it burning into my chest, They weren't pulling me back, they were cutting me loose. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't understand, was that I had already let go. Ever been offered an exit just when you realized you didn't need their door anymore? The silence from my family after that coffee meeting was almost louder than any argument we could have had. There were no angry calls, no attempts to explain, just an envelope sitting on my kitchen counter, heavy with the weight of what they thought would make me walk away quietly. But the thing about silence, it gives you room to think. And thinking is where I found my strength. While Coleman Interiors stumbled, I grew. Janet introduced me to 2 more clients, and soon I was consulting on projects that aligned with my vision, ones that respected the relationship between designer and client, not just the flash of the final reveal. I didn't need my family's name anymore. I was building my own. I hadn't heard from Lydia since the Sinclairs walked. Not a call, not a text. But I felt her presence in the industry. Awkward pitches, rushed social media posts that screamed desperation beneath the polished veneer. And then, the invitation arrived. It wasn't addressed formally. Just a cream-colored card slipped into my mailbox, embossed with Coleman Interiors logo. Inside, a simple message. Join us for the 25th anniversary gala of Coleman Interiors. A celebration of legacy and new beginnings. I stared at the words for a long time. A celebration of legacy. A celebration of what they'd taken from me. I wasn't going to go. That was my first thought. But curiosity, it has a way of lingering. I needed to see it, not for them, for me, to witness what they were without me. The gala was held at the Downtown Art Museum, every inch curated to reflect sophistication and success. But beneath the surface, there were cracks. I walked in, head high, wearing a black silk dress I knew Lydia would envy. The crowd buzzed with polite conversation, but I caught the surprised glances as I moved through the room. Evelyn saw me first. She made her way over, wearing her signature navy suit, smile tight. "Sabrina, I didn't think you'd come." I smiled. "Consider me a curious observer." She didn't respond right away. Then she glanced around, lowering her voice. "It would have been easier if you'd taken the offer." I sipped my champagne. "Easier for whom?" Before she could answer, Lydia appeared, all bright confidence, though her eyes betrayed her. She hugged me stiffly, the way people do when they're performing family for an audience. "I'm glad you came," she said, though the words felt forced. "I wouldn't miss it," I replied, letting my gaze sweep the room. The event was well attended, but there was something hollow about it. I saw the Carmichaels standing off to one side, politely disengaged. The Sinclairs hadn't shown, and when the speeches started, I noticed it, the slight shuffle, the way people's attention drifted as Lydia spoke about innovation and new directions. I knew that feeling. It was the sound of a room pulling away. After the speeches, Evelyn pulled me aside. "We need you back," she said softly, eyes scanning the room. "Things aren't as smooth as they look." I let the words settle between us. "I'm not coming back," I answered, calm and sure. "I've built something I believe in." Her jaw tightened. "You're throwing away your legacy." I smiled gently. "No, I'm just writing my own." She stared at me for a long moment, then turned and walked away. The moment that sealed it came later, as I stood by the entrance, watching Lydia try to rally a small group of potential clients. Her charm was there, but the foundation was cracking beneath it. I caught Brian's eye across the room. He gave me a subtle nod, as if to say, "You see it too." I left without saying goodbye. Back at home, I tucked Ethan into bed and sat by the window, the city lights stretching out like possibilities. I realized I didn't feel angry anymore. Not even sad, just free. They had tried to erase me, but in doing so, they showed me who I really was. Without them. Ever walked away from something that once defined you, only to find yourself stronger without it? There's a moment when you realize you don't have to prove yourself anymore. Not to the people who doubted you, not even to yourself. It doesn't come with fanfare or a grand announcement. It comes quietly, like the sunrise, breaking through the fog. 3 months had passed since the gala. Coleman Interiors had managed to stay afloat, but the ripple effects were undeniable. Projects delayed, clients hesitating. Lydia was still the face of the company, but the foundation was crumbling beneath her polished exterior. Meanwhile, my side project? It had grown into something I hadn't even dared imagine when I first scribbled names into that planner. Word spread quietly, a designer who listened, who valued her client's vision more than the spotlight. The Carmichaels reached out. Then the Langleys, another high-profile family I'd worked with years ago. One by one, they came back, not for Coleman Interiors, but for me. I never advertised, never boasted, but the work spoke louder than any press release Lydia could spin. One afternoon, as I finalized blueprints for a new boutique hotel project, my phone buzzed. A text from Brian. "You might want to check the news." I clicked the link he sent, my eyes scanning the headline. Coleman Interiors faces major setback after losing key contracts. There it was, the unraveling they'd tried so hard to hide. A part of me felt sad, for what we'd built together once. But another part, the deeper part, felt something sharper. Validation. That evening, Evelyn called. She never called at night. "Sabrina," she said softly, that edge of weariness I hadn't heard before. "I thought you should know. Lydia's stepping down." I paused, letting the words settle. "Stepping down?" "She's taking time off. The board's pushing for restructuring." I leaned back in my chair, staring out at the city skyline. "And what do you want from me?" There was a long silence, filled with everything she couldn't say. Then finally, softly, "We'd like you to come back, help steady things, bring back what's been lost." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of her words. The temptation to fix what had been broken, to return, reclaim the seat that had been stolen. But I'd learned something in the months apart. I didn't need their seat. I had built my own table. "I appreciate the call," I said finally, "but I'm not coming back." Evelyn's breath hitched just slightly. "You're really going to walk away from this?" I smiled gently. "I'm not walking away. I'm walking forward." Weeks later, I stood in the middle of my own design studio. Not grand, not flashy, but mine. The walls were filled with samples, blueprints, client visions waiting to take shape. Janet stopped by, dropping off notes for our next project. She paused at the door, looking around. "You know," she said with a smile, "I always knew you'd end up here, running your own show." I laughed softly. Took me longer to realize it. As she left, I sat down at my desk, flipping through a portfolio filled with projects that were no longer theirs, but fully mine. Projects where my name wasn't buried behind a company logo. And just like that, the weight lifted. Not with anger, not with revenge, but with freedom. Ever realized the seat they tried to take from you wasn't the one you were meant to sit in? Maybe it's time to build your own table. If there's one thing this journey taught me, it's that you don't have to sit at a table where your worth isn't seen. Sometimes the most powerful move is to step away and build your own. I didn't set out to compete with my family. I set out to reclaim my voice, my work, my identity. And in doing so, I learned that quiet strength often speaks the loudest. Have you ever faced a moment where walking away was the only way forward? I'd love to hear your story. Drop a comment. Tell me where you're watching from, or what part resonated most with you. And if this touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe for more stories about reclaiming your power and finding your voice.